Hello, bonjour, hola, jumbo, guten tag, and thank you for listening to this episode of the Disney Desk podcast. But actually, it's just me, Carter, this time. So what's going on? Well, every now and then, I see a film that just stays with me. I keep replaying scenes in my head and literally getting emotional just thinking about them. I breathlessly mention or talk about the movie with my friends who are quick to remind me they have not seen it yet. Whatever clips I can find online, whether they're actual movie clips or behind the scene clips, I watch those just to get that little bit of rush again, search social media for fan art. And I kind of just had to accept that I wasn't going to be settled with this movie until I took the time on the podcast to talk about it. And I think I've talked about this before, me and Sydney kind of have different lives right now. And while my life has a lot of sort of restrictions on it, a lot of requirements, I do have a little time every now and then to see a movie. And I try my best to see as many of the water cooler films of the year as possible. The Dunes, the Challengers, the big releases that kind of are peppered throughout the year. And as much as I love doing that and as excited as I am to talk about them, I kind of realized it's not that fun for me, and I can't imagine it's fun for you guys, to just take up time in an episode to yap about a film for 15 minutes where Sydney can only nod her head because she hasn't seen it. I edit the show, so God knows I see how many of the audio waves are me. Yeah, a little less of me would be healthy for the show, is what I'm getting at. So I thought it might be a nice opportunity to take a little space on our YouTube channel where we, keep a lot of clips and Patreon content to talk about what is almost certainly one of my favorite animated films of the year, and is absolutely going to be one of the best films of the year. Of course, I'm talking about DreamWorks' newest film, The Wild Robot. It is directed by Chris Saunders, who you guys might know as the co-director of the How to Train Your Dragon franchise, but also he did Lilo and Stitch, which we covered on our Patreon. So it's based off a series of kids' books. It's about a robot named Roz, a sort of helper drone who ends up stranded on a Pacific Northwest-ish island inhabited by wild animals. And while she's adapting to her surroundings, she's imprinted on by a gosling, and her and sort of an outcast fox must take it upon themselves to raise this little goose and prepare them for their first migration. So it's interesting, the phrase Ghibli-esque has been thrown around a lot with this film. I feel like we've been talking about Ghibli a lot on the podcast lately, partially because we did an episode for my birthday month, and also because I've been talking about it in the context of animation and, reading that new Miyazaki book I got and watching the documentary about Boy and the Heron. And, it's not an unapt comparison. To be fair, Chris Saunders has cited Miyazaki as a big inspiration for this movie. And the same compliment was applied to Lilo and Stitch. Someone argued it's, the first Ghibli-esque Disney movie. But I think a lot about the discussion me and Sydney had when she first saw Porco Rosso, her first Studio Ghibli film, and how Ghibli-esque is invoked in sort of the American critical space. Because when you close your eyes and think Ghibli, what do you think of? Thoughtful, mature, artisanal, contemplative, thinking about nature. All the stuff Sydney was saying. And all of those things are true, obviously, but it really undersells what Ghibli is. And Porco Rosso was a best example of that, because it's silly, it's cartoony, it's adventurous and achingly romantic and nostalgic. It's everything. I find myself coming back to Porco Rosso a lot while thinking about this film, and just the general idea of Ghibli-esque. In a sense, Wild Robot is Ghibli-esque in a sense. Much like Porco Rosso, my beloved, it exemplifies why the animated form is special, why artists like Brad Bird and Guillermo del Toro get really pedantic and specific to remind people that animation is its own medium of film, its own version of filmmaking, not just a genre of film. Because when you replace flesh and blood with ink and paint, something changes. You break open the art form in a way live action just can't, and I really do think this film captures that so perfectly. I guess it makes most... I'm trying to think of what I can say that is unique compared to every other critic or every other pundit or every other putz with a podcast that would make my takes on this film feel special or unique. But, I'll start with the obvious stuff, the sight and sound of it all. Because, even if I didn't think this movie was beautifully written with cool characters and rich themes and ideas and all that good stuff, it'd still be one of the most satisfying vibe movies of the year. Just one of those like sensory experiences everyone talks about. Wild Robot takes that sort of painterly storybook style that Puss in Boots introduced, kind of takes the ball from Puss in Boots, and kind of tears the net down, dunks the ball so hard the glass shatters. It's absolutely beautiful. It's simultaneously an evolution of that style while being utterly unique on its own terms, where they feel like similar films but completely different films. Like, when I talk about films being dreams, this is what I mean. Like, the mood and color and feel of everything is always perfect. It doesn't follow the rules or doesn't look necessarily real. It's not going for realistic, but it looks like what you close your eyes and imagine wilderness to be, what you imagine a robot to be, what you imagine all these critters to be. Like, it's the most perfect thing. It's the most perfect version of that in your head. Like, I genuinely think it's one of my favorite films ever in terms of, like, color and tone. How you can use just simple, like, color and tone to convey emotion. Like, the film takes place roughly over a year, and we go through each season. And if you know me and you know my writing, you know partially why this film gets my goat so much, gets my jelly beans. Because, like, I am a sucker for the storytelling convention of, like, each arc being over a season. Anyone who's read some of my work will be like, that checks out. And the film does such an incredible job of, like, showing us the same locations, showing us the same areas and characters and, like, sort of situations. And by changing the color, changing the hue, changing the season, flowing from like this adventurous and mysterious misty vibe of summer with these golden hues to getting to these like desolate melancholy grays of winter that feel like apocalyptic. It's breathtaking, frankly. Something I really appreciated with this movie was that, like, I think we're finally at the point, at long last, where I feel confident in saying that Pixar and DreamWorks have, like, house styles. I think, we've talked a lot about, like, the consternation, a lot of old school animators, a lot of, the people who grew up with, pen, ink, paper, and pencil, like, their consternation about CGI. And, a lot of that comes from, in a lot of ways, CGI has the same rut modern video games have since we entered the HD era. It always felt like the pursuit of the highest fidelity graphics kind of was, like, the end-all, be-all. Like, that's not to say, like, obviously WALL-E has incredible art direction. I'd argue the Shrek movies, which I rag on, have really good art direction. There's artistry on display, but that's artistry in like a live action filmmaking sense. The tools of said artists are not really factored in, I guess, for lack of a better word. In a lot of ways, CGI has been more akin to live action film, where the artist's tools are mostly serving to create the closest approximation to live action you can do. Like, you have the digital camera, you build these sets, you build these lighting rigs, and then you basically treat it like a live action film. Like, the sort of dreamlike element that hand-drawn had wasn't really on display, for lack of a better word. Like, when you close your eyes and think, Warner Brothers cartoon, you have such a specific vision, a specific motion, a specific tone, a specific snap c'est quoi. When you think of Disney animation, you see that. You see those princesses. You see that immaculate magicness. Whereas, like, we are finally at that point where I feel like I close my eyes and I have such a clearer picture of what a Pixar film and what a DreamWorks film is. DreamWorks going all in on this, like, storybook sort of fairy tale style, this, like, dream-like, sweet, warm quality. Whereas Pixar is doing this really cool thing where they complement their super photorealistic, almost live action-esque sets and environments with these incredible, cartoony, expressive, bean mouth, as the annoying people on the internet would say, character designs. And for the music, I could probably do a whole, like, review of the score and how perfectly it works and how the motifs play so beautifully with each other. Like, this film really does pass my test of, if you turned off all the dialogue, all the sound effects, and just played the score over the visuals, all of the heart and soul and emotion of the film would be intact. The silent film era sort of concept, if you will. Like it's so magical in how it makes the tiniest littlest moments, the silliest jokes, or the most inconsequential character moments feel like the most important thing in the world, and it keeps that energy for like the big epic sweeping parts as well. Sydney once used the phrase symphonic to describe a movie, and I think that's very apt here, both figuratively and literally. Literally, the score is so perfect in how it can just flow so beautifully from these like silent, slow moments to this like eerie, misty mystery to like these bouncy, whimsical, and wonderful moments to like genuine moments of horror and hopelessness crescending into these beautiful heights of like emotional catharsis. I mean, Jesus, what else do we want movies to be if not that, you know? And I'd be remiss if I didn't take at least a minute to talk about the voice cast. Lupita Nyong'o has been an absolute real one on this press tour. She has been, anytime anyone's interviewed her and talked about her performance, she has underlined, no, I am just lending my voice. The performance is all in the animation. It's all from these animators. And on one hand, I respect the hell out of her for this, because it is so important during a very difficult time for the animation industry, for the community, who are losing their jobs in mass and, like, at the mercy of studios who simply don't know how to do these things anymore. Like, to have her speak so emphatically and from the chest about this is huge. But, Lupita, you are selling yourself horribly short here, ma'am. Like, this is a masterclass voice performance. It's one of the ones that reminds you, like, alongside the Planet of the Apes movies, it's one of those ones that I feel like really, like, stumps for voice acting being a valid form of performance akin to live action. That we genuinely need to have a category for this at award shows. It's one of the most just absolute perfect dances between animation and voice performance. The way the animators bounce off her voice is so perfect. They get so much, like, personality and charm and emotion out of this character who doesn't have a face. It's so incredible how much they can do with just slouching and posture and a little bit of color on, like, her LED lights and those big expressive eyes. Just the fact that you have me shaken by her, like, little her lenses just going at, like, appearing as, like, half open, as if she's, like, longing and nostalgic. Just absolutely beautiful. I really could do so much of this review just being, like, doing grunts and sound effects and just being like, oh, good movie. And, like, she is so good at, like, the arc of it. Honestly, going from this, like, artificial corporate version of helpful and kind to, like, the genuine human real thing. That there is a bit very early in the film that they replay a couple times centered around QR codes that absolutely, it's not even that, like, it's so dumb, but it's so funny, and she just sells the hell out of it. And the whole voice cast is great. It really is a who's who of, it's what we were discussing the other day of just like, hey, yeah, they're here? Hell yeah. Pedro Pascal gives one of my favorite performances of his. He is just really fun. Catherine O'Hara just hams it up. Vic Rames inexplicably brings his A-game for another quietly huge role in an animated film, much like Garfield. Kit Connor's in this, who I'm supposed to know from... I'm kidding. I know he's in Heartstopper, right? I'm actually going to look that up so I don't mischaracterize that. I think that's what he's from. Yes, Heartstopper. It was prominent in my bookstore. We even get a delightful Bill Nye appearance. For my friends who don't watch as much, who aren't, like, deep in the movie weeds as me, not the science guy, Bill Nye spelled Nighy. Like, DreamWorks has gotten maligned in the past for their, like, quote-unquote celebrity castings. Like, they tend to get slapped the hardest with the hire real voice actors complaint. You know, Katzenberg left Disney high off the Robin Williams in Aladdin stuff and basically recreated that formula at DreamWorks. You know, those early Shrek posters that just had the big names Myers, Murphy, Diaz. I'm genuinely forgetting who the fourth name was. I'm so sorry, whoever played Lord Farquaad. I cannot remember right now. But, like, works like this, Bad Guys, like, they've changed. This is what, like, I don't know. I've learned to get less pretentious about voice actor versus actor sort of stuff because, you know, I truly believe in any great actor can give a great voice performance, and this is emblematic of that. Finding the right person for the right role and just letting them sing. And I think where all this artistry kind of succeeds the most is that wild part of the title. Yes, we're getting pedantic about the title. Hang with me for a minute. They do such a wonderful job of like capturing the different shades of nature, for lack of a better word. Because like, what is wilderness? It's beautiful and awe-inspiring and mysterious and like, inspiring. But it's scary. It's dangerous. It's really violent. If you don't properly respect and fear nature, it will kill you if given the chance. Like, so many times in this film, we're just following them on this terrain that feels insurmountable. The changes in weather feel deadly. There's a great moment with a tidal wave early in the movie. And the characters are perfectly anthropomorphized, where they're cartoony and likable, but you're never allowed to forget that they are wild animals who, like, hunt and eat each other. I think all of it's really summed up well. There's that moment in the trailer. It's like one of the money shots from the trailer where Roz touches a rock and all of this wave of butterflies just fly past her. And the light is like that perfect golden hour. It's just like the most beautiful, immaculate thing. Would you believe me if I told you literally 5 seconds after that, Roz is holding the decapitated head of a bird with gore and everything because a bobcat jumped at it. Another way all of this work kind of comes through is the world building. I love the sort of way this story tells its story, for lack of a better word. I think me and Sydney used the phrase the other day to describe this kind of like assuredness, which was the style at the time. Like, it's a level of confidence and maturity in the audience kind of just buying into the world and not having to stop and explain everything. Like, you believe this is a living, breathing place that has existed for generation upon generation before Roz, and probably could have gone on without her for several more generations. Like, characters will be introduced, rules on how the social systems work, social structures are introduced, and the audience is trusted to just go like, yes, that makes sense. At some point midway through the film, we're introduced to a character we have never seen before, Longneck. He's like the leader of the geese. But all of the characters like talk and react like, yes, Longneck's here. Thank God, a goose with some common sense. Like, it's not this like big, slow exposition-y reveal. It just trusts you to be like, yeah, they've been on this island long enough. They know this guy. So by extension, we know this guy. The film doesn't even need to stop the proceedings to really explain to the audience what happened to all the humans. We don't need this like sort of live action prologue mini film. No disrespect to Wall-E, which rules. We'll cover it someday. You just show a little Roz infomercial and a bridge underwater, and you immediately just get, that's what happened. Like, again, if we're doing a story about surviving in the wilderness, it does not work unless that wilderness feels lived in and real, and you trust the audience to buy in, and they did that emphatically. And all of this is kind of slowly, hang with me here, gang, toward one of my bigger important points for all this. I keep coming back to this idea of like balance, of naturalism, of flow. And it brings me back to the Ghibli-esque point. See, I mentioned earlier, Ghibli-esque, I feel like, should really be more defined as exemplary of animation's power. And all of this stuff I've been talking about, like being able to deftly dance between colors and moods and soul and tone, this everything, that's Ghibli-esque. That's Wild Robot-esque. This ability to eloquently weave tone and genre, like to bounce between seriousness and humor and romance and nostalgia, any emotion you can think of, often all in one scene, captures damn near scenes that capture damn near the entire spectrum of human emotion to create this symphony of artistry. That's what I mean when I'm saying animation is special. Something about removing the physical human element allows you to fully embrace this idea of filmmaking being a dream, or I guess fairy tale logic in this case, where like the emotions are big and vibrant and technicolored, and you confront these big existential ideas all at once in a way that you just kind of can't in a conscious world where there's like a physical quote unquote realness to it. I mean, I'd argue that like that's a lot of what Disney's best work is too. Again, how those early movies, like how like Snow White weaves from this like dreamy romance to the scary moment in the forest to like this silly bit with the dwarves and all the music to go back to horror, like how those dance, and even like the Disney Renaissance. Like, I've talked about it before, like, people really forget that Beauty and the Beast is really damn goofy. We simultaneously have this big operatic stuff with Gaston and Beast and Belle rushing to save him and, like, crying over his dead body. Intercut with, like, a candelabra beating the crap out of someone with a frying pan. Like, a part of the reason why some of the live action ones struggle is just because when you do add a physical real person, something in people's brains just kind of like won't turn to accept all of these different tones happening at once. Weirdly, I think I've mentioned this before, but like it really is. It's the difference between Thor Ragnarok and Thor Love and Thunder, where Thor Love and Thunder has a Saturday morning cartoon energy. It tries to be more serious with the silly stuff, and people just don't accept that. But they do accept Thor Ragnarok, which is just silly, 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 a pinch of emotion, silly, 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 silly. Like the parts are more segregated, for lack of a better word. But let me give an example from this movie. It's honestly maybe the moment that kind of just made me fully believe. I mean, I already believed this movie was a masterpiece, but it's the moment where I'm like, I will be an acolyte for this movie. So it's a little after, like, kind of one of the emotional low points in the film. Right after, like, a super gray, melancholy sequence. Roz is told by Fink the Fox that the winter storm that's rolled in is the nastiest they've ever seen, and a lot of animals just aren't going to make it if they don't get to better shelter. So Roz takes it upon herself to go rescue as many critters as possible. The scene is just pushed on by this incredible driving score, and and the way they personify like the actual storm itself, the tumultual, like the tumult in like the waves, the gusts of snow, like how it's like there's chunks of ice in between the puffy powdery parts. Like it just deftly balances being this epic heroic sequence. It becomes desolate at points as the landscape gets worse and worse, and yet still finds time to have these tiny jabs and jokes because Fink just really fucking hates everyone on this island right now and is kind of deep down okay with a lot of them dying. But then this one moment happens. It can't be much longer than like maybe 10 seconds at most. Roz is digging through the snow looking for someone, just shines a spotlight in the hole she's made, and she just quickly shakes her head and puts the snow back so this critter gets the dignity of a burial. And we just kind of hang there for a second before she speaks again, reassuring Fink that we can have this solemn and genuinely respectful moment in the middle of this intense action rescue scene with all of these quips that literally come right after Fink made a joke about the skunk already being dead so they could leave him for dead. And all for an animal who we have never seen on screen before. That's animation. That's why I think animation is so unique. It can do everything at once in a way that live action films just sometimes struggle to do. And as we reach the end of whatever all this is, I guess I'm trying to find, like, as usual, I try to find a way to sum everything up. What is The Wild Robot about? And I love the themes and big ideas of this film because they embody two mantras I really like. Presenting common ideas in ways you never thought to see before, and simple yet rich themes, like a cheesecake that makes you cry. I actually did have a cheesecake that almost made me cry. Apparently the same recipe was served at the White House during the Clinton minute. Not important. Anyway, Saunders mentioned in an interview that one of the main mantras during the filmmaking was, kindness is a survival skill. Apparently it's something Peter Brown, the author of the original books, would say to them during their discussions during pre-production. And you can feel that mantra in every second, in every damn frame of this film. Because kindness doesn't come naturally, or maybe not obviously. It's a human trait that humans are frustratingly terrible at. We make every single incentive in this world for you to be selfish and cruel and self-serving, and then we build robots to give you that artificial like version of kindness and empathy while we wall ourselves off in little bubbles. And animals can show empathy, but at the end of the day, by their nature, they're required to follow their animal instincts. A scene that kind of stuck in my craw when I first saw it, but I learned to appreciate more and more, was this first scene with Pinktail the opossum. She basically lays out how imprinting works and how Roz needs to make sure this little gosling can get off the island. She makes a quip about how she's a mother of 7 before we hear a loud chomping sound and a scream, where she corrects herself and says 6. And at first I thought it was undercutting one of the film's messages about motherhood, especially because she's really doing that Borscht Belty, like, ugh, being a mom. But then I realized it kind of elevated all the themes, because her reaction is totally normal and rational for the world they've created. It's the wilderness. Critters get eaten. Critters get left behind. Critters die. It would have been perfectly reasonable for all of those, by the laws of nature, for all of those critters to freeze to death in that winter. But Roz is there, and Roz is different. She's not quite human, she's not quite wild, but she knows she wants to be kind. Longbeak later takes Bright Bill. I forgot I don't think I ever said the little gosling's name. Yeah, the gosling they take care of is named Bright Bill. He takes Bright Bill's side and kind of just explains, like, I don't think you realize how special your position here is. You are the runt of your litter. Your mother, in getting the rest of the kids fed and ready to go, learning how to swim and fly and get off this island, she probably just would have left you behind. You probably would have gotten, like, picked off by a predatory bird or a fox or something, and she just would have barely thought about that. That just would have been how it works, because that's how this works. If it wasn't for Roz, you would have died. Like, kindness is kind of abnormal. Like, the concept of motherhood is kind of abnormal, despite it being so natural. Telling someone you love them is near impossible sometimes. Like, because the world is wild and cruel and actively rewards both human and critters embracing their worst instincts at times to just follow their programming. Like, again, common themes told in new ways. Just this idea of a robot breaking its programming and becoming more human, becoming more kind and empathetic. Like, we've seen that a gazillion times before. That is like, so you want to write, that's like chapter 1 of, so you want to write a story where robots are a theme for something. And yet seeing it weaved eloquently with this idea of wilderness, the idea that everyone follows programming, is so goddamn beautiful. If you can break through that programming, whether it's societal or animalistic, and just let yourself be kind, you can survive. You can find a place in all of it. You can build and grow and make a village. Again, I like the theme of motherhood in this because it does take a village. Roz creates a village by being kind and raising this creature that, by all reasonable understandings of how nature works, should have just gotten eaten. The world pushes people towards survival of the fittest because it's cold and calculating and safe and fair or just or whatever pseudoscience term weirdos want to use to justify being dickish and cruel to other people. Whereas, survival of the kindness is hard. It is hard to open up your heart to people because it can be filled with pain and loss and confusion and sacrifice and the fear that you're never going to be able to tell someone really how you feel and might have missed your window. And yet it is paradoxically the most natural thing. It is the most fulfilling thing and enriching thing and enlightening thing. All it takes is that little gosling putting its head on Roz, and Roz is fundamentally changed for the better. And as the film ends on all of these notes, this swelling feeling of kindness and the idea that love really is like a transcendent, electrifying power that transcends time and miles and loss and memory. I don't know what else to say, but I feel like I always do when I see a special movie. I leave the theater floating. I guess I wouldn't be doing my due diligence if I didn't briefly talk about some of the behind-the-scenes stuff with this film. Why would it not drama? By all accounts, the cast and crew are cool. While it feels like this fresh and new direction for the studio, it also kind of feels like an endpoint. This is the last film that's going to be made completely in-house by DreamWorks. Obviously they'll still have a team in California, they'll still have stuff in the US, but a lot of their animation work is kind of getting outsourced internationally. And this is a lot of what I talk about with this era of our lives, for lack of a better word. This era of private equity, of Silicon Valley culture, this desperation to just cut costs at all costs, even if it hurts this incredible base you've made. As some people on social media have attested, many of the people who pioneered this painterly storybook style at DreamWorks, they're just not at the studio anymore. They got laid off. They're elsewhere. They don't have jobs. That knowledge is gone. And that is what really makes me mad. This utter contempt and carelessness a lot of executives have around institutional knowledge. The idea that it's like, it is worth destroying this incredible foundation you made just for the sake of a couple extra pennies. Like, truly, the tiniest blip on a stock line of fake money that means nothing. I mean, it's kind of what I talked about with, like, Disney animation. Yes, they could do a hand-drawn film, but it won't look anything like what you imagine a Disney animated film would be, because so much of the talent that made those films is gone, and they need to build that infrastructure again. That foundation isn't really there. We see blips of it, but to do 90 minutes of that, we're kind of, like, back to square one. It's just this arrogance that you think you can swap new people in. Again, not having that kindness, not having that empathy, that anyone can just learn how to do things just because you worked at a goddamn Renaissance fair. You think you can run one. Sorry, I did personal stuff there. But you know what? I'm going to choose to be hopeful on this one, because I want to believe we'll have more wild robots. Because that's what the film and filmmakers would want. Near the end of the film, two characters plant a tree in an area that got burned down. And I want to believe in that. That good can always grow after destruction. That love really can preserve what matters, even in the wildest circumstances. And if so much of why me and Sydney do this podcast is about that family entertainment, children's media, animation has power, that it teaches you things about the world that you need to hear, I gotta practice what I preach and believe that this is not the end, but an exciting new start. The film is currently in theaters. It is doing pretty well, like very well by the standards of original animation. The sort of October space has kind of, ripped wide open in the wake of Joker underperforming. There's not a lot of counter-programming for it right now. It is just, if you want to see something for the whole family, that's kind of it, unless you have older kids and want to go see Beetlejuice. It will be arriving on digital on the 15th. Even though I'm someone who's very loud about COVID consciousness, I do think if you can safely see a movie ideally masked in theaters, that is always the best way to do it. But obviously, I understand a lot of people don't really like the theater experience, and I don't know. We can litigate theatrical windows all day, but this is already almost 30 minutes. This film is genuinely one of the most beautiful films I've ever seen. It is one of those ones that makes you excited for the art form, excited for the concept of creation and art, and, it left me floating, which is all I really ask for. So whatever way you see it, please try to see it as soon as possible. And until spring rolls around and our migrating group of geese come back to do another episode like this, I'm Carter, and have a magical day.